Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our little talk here called Stop Tech Debt and Start Using Faster, More Secure Paths to Production, a webinar. I think it's nice to have a little title there. Well, I'm Cote. I'm on the developer relations teams here at VMware Tanzu. I don't really talk with developers very much or do advocacy for them. Instead, I end up talking with managers and executives and other people who are, you could say, the programmers of their organizations, and thinking about how they're setting up their organization, the processes they have, the structure of it, the way they think, to basically get better at how they're using software to run their business or their organization, whatever it may be. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Cote. My name is Alvin Nguyen. I'm a senior analyst over at Forrester Research. Recently joined in January of this year, and coverage is enterprise architecture, and my focus is really on platform architecture and technical debt.
Yeah, and so when you and I were planning this out, you were going over some of the recent research that you and other people at Forrester have been working on, and I was getting very interested in it because, well, I guess this shows you how exciting I and people in our field are, what we get excited about. But it was great to see kind of like a model that y'all are working on to understand. Well, to put it in my way of thinking about it, like dealing with legacy systems and IT and asset and software. And I've been thinking about this and working on, it's a loose way of putting it, but I've been talking with people about it and, writing things here and there. And especially in large enterprises and certain types of industries as well. Like I think in particular in the financial world, where you have organizations that are sometimes literally hundreds of years old, who have all the computers that have ever existed. That's a bit of an exaggeration, but they've been around for a while. But I find in these large organizations that taking care of your existing or your legacy IT stuff, it's this, how would you describe it? It's a very difficult problem because on the one hand, I mean, it's like any kind of maintenance that you would expect in a system or a machine. And so on the one hand, we all sort of know that you don't let the factory rust, right? Like if you want the machine to be running, you got to like make sure it's, you swap out the parts that break. You just need to dust it, right? Like you need to take care of it. But there's something confusing, maybe not confusing. There's something that we don't quite know intuitively, like a factory, about software and IT and things like that. And I feel like maybe it's really easy to think that, like, let's just say software doesn't rust, right? Like it's kind of eternal, and you don't have this notion of like needing to maintain it. So I think that gets to the other thing that makes legacy such a difficult problem is it's not really immediately apparent what the value of spending time maintaining it is versus like shipping a new feature. And so that's why I was really interested in the thinking and the models that y'all were going over, because it felt like it would get us closer to building up that intuition and having organizations know and have a way of figuring out that it was something that they needed to address.
Yes, and just to kind of give a little bit of a background on what we're doing. Right now we're doing some research on tech debt, and obviously with Cote, we shared a little bit of that with him. We're looking at expanding it in a couple directions. We're looking at expanding in how we measure technical debt, because with the traditional definition being around financial impact or costs, we find that doesn't give you the complete picture, right? There's also process, there's personnel, there's risk, there's reputation. So we want to measure in all the meaningful aspects what any of your technology decisions are going to do to you. By same token, we want to expand beyond just software development. There's things like, well, the software stack, your hardware that's going to support the operations of anything you develop, operating models, governance, risk compliance, all of those things also impact how you should make your technology decisions. And so we're trying to make sure that all of that's covered. I think in this case, we've got 48 different measures. That may be a little bit overwhelming, but
Right.
but it's one of the things here. Not everybody needs to look at everything, but being aware that there's more than just the financial and just your software development, like the OSs, the libraries you connect to, the systems that you
Right.
run on. Uh, those have immense impact on how you should be running. So we want to make sure to cover that.
Yeah, I mean, I think well, first of all, it's always good to have, like, a little bit less than a round number, because then you've got room to add some in. Like, it gives you some tolerance there, and then you can say it's under 50. Anyhow.
Yes.
But I mean, you're getting to exactly what I think helps kind of build up that intuition is, there's the saying that you can't manage what you can't measure, and I think in this area it's also like you can't know what you can't measure when it comes to IT, right? And another thing that you were just alluding to that I think is interesting and also helpful for this problem of, like, dealing with legacy stuff is being able to get a system level view of everything, right? Like, not just one component of it, and not even like all the components, but how those components fit together, right? Because it's,
Yeah.
and that also brings up the point that, well, it brings up the point that, like, sometimes just like updating something isn't always the right move, right? Especially if you know the relationships between things, because then you can make trade-offs. Like, maybe we should update this database, but we don't have time to do everything, and there's something much more important to update. But that makes me wonder, like, so let's say you gather these 48 metrics together, right? Maybe 50 one day. Then, like, how do you get to a decision of what to do next? Like, how does this kind of drive selecting what to modernize and what actions to take from that?
Yeah, I think in what we're trying to promote, when you look at all the factors, you look at, all right, how much is it going to cost to redeploy? Do you need to update OSs? Or the library, are there security issues that you need library updates for? Do you need other patching? How much manpower it takes and other things? You can look at all of those aspects to determine, okay, it's going to take this much time, and maybe my partners who are integrating into that software that I've developed, they're not ready yet, right? You have to factor all of those things in to make sure and see that dollar sign. And what we want to promote is not necessarily just see the numbers, but kind of see patterns, see images to say, am I matching up my budget with what's available? Am I matching the work schedule and the availability of all the resources who have to get involved internally, externally, with my customers, with events around the customers and my organization? Do they match up? And so at this point, it becomes, even though there's a lot to look at, it becomes easier because you can see everything fits in these little graphics. And so that's one of the goals here, is to kind of make even though there's a lot of complexity, if we can simplify how you can evaluate, it makes it a lot easier long term.
Yeah, and I remember in your background, you have worked on modernization projects many times.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could contrast, the kind of approach that we're talking about here with, let's say, the usual way of going about modernizing things. Like, what, and by usual, I mean, what have you encountered? Good and bad, about how organizations kind of approach this idea of discovering, categorizing, and sort of like deciding what to do when it comes to modernizing.
Thank you. So part of my background, for over 20 years, I've been a consultant before becoming an analyst. And I will preface this by saying consultants usually don't get brought in unless there's a lot that's going wrong, or
That's right.
need a recognition of the need to bring in external expertise. So what I have seen a lot of has been organizations, they're looking at, well, consultants are great for being somebody to take the blame if necessary. But what we've done is usually we'll do an assessment of the current state of what needs to happen and bring those options up to the executives, to leadership, for them to actually make the decisions. And they'll go on from that. A lot of times in more traditional organizations, they're very much focused on cost reductions. And that's one of the things there. How can we consolidate? How can we make things operate leaner and cheaper? And one of the things from Forrester's research is a majority of organizations there are traditional like that. They're looking at cost reductions. They're not necessarily completely siloed, but there are organizational barriers to kind of sharing that information or even the experiences, so that leadership doesn't always get all the information they need. And as a consultant, I can attest to how difficult it is to get some of that information. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try, and it doesn't mean that all that data has to be perfect. But in order to make a decision, you need to at least get in the ballpark, so directionally, it's good. Fortunately, we've seen improvements over the years, and so more recently, we're seeing people who are not just looking at cost reductions, but becoming more efficient. What's the right product? When's the right time to actually do this modernization or transformation? And so that's at least heartening to see. But at this point, it's, we've seen the variety of people who, in my previous career or previous life, we've seen, hey, we advise you not to do this. No, it's cheaper. We're going with it. And
right. Yeah. You're making me think of some of the modernization work. Like I say we, but I haven't done this work. I just talk with people who do it. But that we over at in VMware Tanzuland do in our labs group. And it's true. It is like, it's almost, well, one thing that's true is like the consultant always has this, I wouldn't call it a superpower, but this unique ability that it's always confounding to me that people inside organizations don't have this power on their own, but whatever. But you do have that outsider view, and also the ability, as you were saying, to going back to that kind of full view like y'all have in the system. It's kind of easier for a consultant to move around and talk to different groups and try to pull that view together. Like, it's just because it's part of the remit. But then also another point that you're bringing up that I notice with organizations a lot is, and it gets to that, but the primary thing we want to do is reduce costs, is it almost skips over a first step, not only the analysis that y'all's framework does, but sort of like learning what's even possible, right? And like kind of training yourself to like slow and steady learn how to pick things and learn how to modernize those systems, whether it's a software that you have or like a back-end service that you're relying on, or even like a data center, right? There's often a lot of, I don't know, mild hubris about like, I don't know, just go reduce cost, right? We don't really need to investigate and see if that's possible.
Yes.
So it always seems like having that kind of learning process in place is extremely handy going in there.
Yes, it is. And there are benefits of getting like consultancies in terms of, they're more experienced at doing this type of work repeatedly. So and that's something that I'm sure we'll be touching back on again later in this conversation. But, having that experience means you've seen the worst and you've hopefully seen the best as well. So you know what best practices to apply. Like with the viewpoints of, you can see they're too focused on cost reduction, saying I need to get rid of the most expensive platform. Well, that expensive platform may be the one that gets you the most revenue. and you have to look at the ROI to really understand, no, this is the one you need to keep. Get rid of the cheaper ones because they don't add as much value or they're not as comprehensive. And when we talk about in our parlance, future fit, where organizations are at the peak of performance, they're creative, adaptive, resilient. That's where looking at customer outcomes and how to achieve those rather than just the internal metrics. And at that point, you become an innovator, and you have competitive differentiators implemented through these decisions. And so that's where you're able to create new markets and have that first mover advantage. And that's where we see a lot of organizations who operate at that level really earn more revenue, earn more profits compared to their competitors in industry.
So tell me a little bit more about the sort of category of things you were just discussing, this notion of being future fit, and in particular, like, as I've kind of alluded to several times, I'm often to use one of my favorite cheesy analogies, right? I call it like the flossing problem. Like, we all know we should floss our teeth, and I'm sure you do multiple times a day. But speaking for myself, I'm very aware I should be flossing my teeth. I brush them, but I don't floss them, right? So like, people know they should be doing these hygienic activities, right? Like, especially over the decades, we've heard about like business IT alignment and, focusing on growth and things like that. And yet I don't know, maybe it's just some availability bias that I have, but like, I feel like many of the organizations I encounter, they don't really make decisions based on future fit, right? And so I'm very curious, like, how, when you see people switch over to being interested and concerned about that, like, what is that process like? And I think a lot of it comes by, as you were doing, the way that you define it and discuss it and kind of like describe the tastiness of it.
All right. I think how I would describe it. So at Forrester, we have kind of three categories. Traditional, how IT organizations have operated since the beginning. A lot of it is they're inwardly focused. They're, in a lot of cases, siloed. At the most mature, they're starting to look at cloud, but they're looking at lift and shift. And that, they're not. The other aspect that Forrester talks a lot about is customer obsession. And they're either they're not really focused on their customers. They may not know what all the needs of their customers. And so this is the least mature. I think from last year's statistics, and I know we've got some updates coming up in the next week if it's not already published, but roughly from who we've surveyed, 59% of the organizations we surveyed last year were traditional. When you move over to modern, so this is where you start looking at more agile organizations, more cross-functional behavior. They're cloud first, platform based, and they're focused, they're more aware of the customers, and they're looking at customer needs. So we're seeing that about 37% of those organizations, of the organizations we survey, operate as modern IT organizations. Right. And future fit, the adaptive, creative, resilient, where they're looking for differentiators, where they're looking for market advantages. Last year, we saw about 3% of the organizations surveyed were operating at that level. So
wow, only 3%. That's crazy.
I think this year's numbers, and I don't want to spoil the surprise of my colleagues, but I think it went up. So
that's good.
And obviously Forrester's pitched like modern IT for more than a decade. So it takes a while, and the fact that still most organizations are traditional means that there's a lot of work. I do want to preface it though, just because you're traditional doesn't mean that all parts of the organization are traditional. You may have parts that would be considered modern or even future fit, right? But the predominant behavior is going to be traditional there, and same for future fit.
Yeah. No, I think, especially as you're saying, there's a variety of fitness across the organization. And in particular, I feel like the larger the organization gets, the more mergers and acquisitions there have been, or divestitures, all these sorts of things that really, bring in another kind of wicked problem of legacy issues in large organizations is you don't always get to pick your problems. Right. They're often forced on you by outside forces that
Yes.
you need to work with.
And I know there is a organization during my consulting days, subcontracted to, they did a number of mergers and acquisitions, and that was a big problem that had to run into. They also ran into the exact opposite. So this large organization acquired a much smaller one, and the smaller organization said, "Hey, we've got a better user experience, customer experience with this platform. You should adopt it." And the response was, yes, it's a better customer experience at this, or user experience at this point, but you're serving essentially 100 people in the
Right.
US. We're a multinational organization with over 100,000 people. So it's going to cost us more to switch over and to what's possibly a better customer experience or user experience platform, but it's not proven at our scale. It doesn't have all the rules and logistics for global operation built in yet. That's a big chance. Plus, training all of the employees involved. And so that's where looking at all these other factors really comes in. It's, you may have better technology. And, in terms of legacy, is a relative term. It could be legacy, maybe something that has been implemented last month when something brand new comes up, right? And it's what we want to, again, at Forrester, we want to take that holistic view, and we want to be a little bit careful in terms of how we say things, and in terms of our terminology, just to make sure that people understand and are careful about how they make these decisions. But yeah.
No, certainly. Like I think kind of related to that. Let's say being kind about legacy things is
Yes.
is there's all sorts of great definitions and ways of thinking about it, and like I guess like the most understanding definition I've come up with so far is like it's some chunk of IT, whether that's software or something that you need to change, but you're afraid to change, right? Because otherwise you would just call it your software, right? Like you wouldn't put the word legacy in front of it. And I think, that fear often arises from just like not knowing if you're going to break something, right? Or not knowing how much it's going to cost, or, it's kind of the unknown. And like, and I think having kind of developing that systems view, that high level view that you're talking about, right? Like hopefully it gives you a little more confidence to, not be so fearful, right?
Yeah.
About changing things. Gives you more information.
Yeah. And I completely agree with that. I know being informed, having that comprehensive or holistic view will help. I have seen people who, it is a scary proposition. Consultants are there as change agents because change, there's a lot of fear around change, and
Sure.
not just with people, but organizations as well. So I've seen people willfully ignoring new information, if possible, because it allows them to keep the status quo. And that's one of the things there I do want to push with kind of the new approach to tech debt is that, these changes that are happening, whether you acknowledge them or not, the fact that, hey, languages change, platforms change, hardware gets older, that kind of, and I think in the question somebody mentioned kind of that bit rot. It may not be obvious, but there is that kind of decay, and it may not just be in terms of the assets. It may be in terms of skills, in terms of experience, because as much as the industry has tried to move away from COBOL, we still haven't. And same thing with certain other languages and platforms. There is always a push to kind of modernize. And if you fight it, at some point, you're going to find yourself left alone. And I did have a client where they had a platform where there are 12 experts listed in Wikipedia left in the world, and 8 of them worked for them.
Oh, wow.
Other 4 were retired. So
Yes.
that was an interesting problem. And whether they wanted to move away from the legacy platform or not, that was removed from the leadership.
Right. You have such a clear degree of urgency in that case that it's almost you don't really need to do a 48-point analysis, right? Like you very quickly understand what issue you have there. And you bring up another thing I was interested in hearing your view on, and that is, we're talking all about like technology, whether it's software and other IT things, and each sort of like whether it's every 5 to 10 years or whatever, but there's always no pun intended for present company, but there's always a new wave of like tools and innovations that come out, right? And at the moment, I think we're in. I think what you might call cloud native technologies have been around for a while, but I don't know what y'all see in your surveys, but my feel is that we're still kind of early for like very wide adoption for like everyone using it in large organizations broadly, for most everything. But I'm curious, like when you talk with people or you kind of look at the new way of running IT, like what kind of tooling and technology are you seeing that's helpful there for sorting out legacy issues?
Well, obviously there's a lot of management platforms, both from legacy on-premises, the cloud native tools, even from the cloud service providers themselves or third parties. We're seeing a lot of those tools start like for IT asset management or configuration management databases. We see a lot of those being very useful to at least give you the baseline in terms of your assets. In terms of development, well, I don't want to, I'm obviously on your program at this point, but we see a lot of, platform tools like for software development, the typical metrics, lines of code. You look at, issue trackers and other things to actually take a look at seeing how much. So we're seeing, a lot of people leveraging these tools. Now, the problem is at that point, you've got a lot of options. We see a lot of people, they're not necessarily single cloud service providers implementations. A lot of them are looking at hybrid as well as multi-cloud implementations. And the issue there is that you have to make a choice, right? Compatibility, data standardization and normalization, making sure that individually what you have, but working with several tools rather than one can be problematic and is another form of tech debt that we see growing. But it's one of the things we want to promote is the fact that if you can rely on fewer tools, it is much more manageable because you have to have expertise in all of them in order to leverage them to their fullest. And one of the things, even if you're only going to, let's say, set it up so you can hook up, pull the data to put into one tool that you want to use universally, it's something we recommend. But we do see people or organizations using multiple platforms and requiring, in a lot of cases, or leveraging multiple tools, and we see that as a problem going forward.
Yeah, I think what you're, it's almost like there's so many levels of tech debt you can have, and one of them is just like tool tech debt, and
Yes.
it's maybe the debt metaphor doesn't exactly work because it's more like just too many layers of it, right? Like you have too many of these tools that are trying to like the way you were putting it, it's not only that you use the tool to like gather up and understand what's in your portfolio, or that you use the tool to change the portfolio, but once you have so many tools, they start to conflict with each other. Like you're not really sure like which one is correct, like which single source of truth is the actual single source of truth. And I think that, especially as you were describing kind of like the way you think through getting that view of the system, it seems like one of the most difficult things is just knowing what you have asset wise.
Yes. And I mean, like I mentioned before, if you're an AWS, obviously using their tools makes a lot of sense. But if you're an AWS, an Azure, GCP, or any other CSPs out there, getting all that data together, it doesn't make sense to go with one of the provider's tools and leverage all the others. And the answer may be no. It depends on the combination. At that point, having a universal third-party tool that integrates with all of them may end up being the better choice. And so this is, to us, situational, right? And obviously, as technology keeps changing, as you see all these services that AWS, Azure, GCP keep adding, it's tough to track and it's tough to keep up with all of them. But using platforms that can be leveraged on any of the cloud service providers or on-premise that you use ends up paying some benefits immediately, right? It may not be the ultimate solution you go with because technology changes and everything else, and you may change your mind. But if you're going to do multi-platform in terms of cloud service providers, in terms of on premises, going with something that can be abstracted across all the platforms, or as many of them as possible, ends up being good. There's obviously the pros and cons of, can you fully utilize everything? And if it's important enough, everybody's going to tune it so you can fully utilize it. So it's a question of, who do you wait for at that point, right?
Right. No, your last point is a really good one, that and it balances the how early do you use a new technology versus how late, right? And kind of as you were saying, at some point, everyone will use this instrumentation and monitoring thing. Like probably if you want to use like SNMP, that's not a problem, right? Like
Yes.
you can integrate with whatever's there. And I think you're also making me think of, especially when it comes to cloud native stuff, like it provides a good example of the following, which is, when I talk with people or kind of listen to people talking about multi-cloud or whatever, heterogeneous IT as we used to call it, like a lot of the concern is around like avoiding lock-in, right? Like being stuck in one proprietary thing. And of course, kind of like my jokey definition of legacy stuff, it's only lock-in if you want to leave. Like if you like being there, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But like there's almost something else to this notion of lock-in that isn't quite that, but you're kind of alluding to it, which is, if you have kind of, well, I'll just say open standards that you're using, or an open way of not only representing your infrastructure, but instrumenting it, knowing what's there, and also gathering things from it. And it seems like that's one of the things that I think I've come to appreciate a lot about the kind of cloud native world, especially when you put something like Kubernetes in there. Is what something like Kubernetes is trying to do is create a standard for how you represent a lot of this stuff, right? Like how what a process running somewhere is, how these different processes talk with each other, how you package up and configure these things, so that you do have the ability to not be like locked into one format and then have a lot of difficulty understanding and translating between them. Now, of course, there's a lot of details to all of that, but it's definitely, I think the intention early on with something like Kubernetes was to have exactly that, to have one, as they would say, API for all these types of infrastructure that you have out there, which hopefully gets us closer to like, I mean, it's hard to think if that addresses like tech debt, but it definitely makes it less obscure, less of a closed system. It's easier to kind of peer in and mess around with things.
Yeah, and that fear of missing out, right? In terms of, hey, am I going to write it? I remember like with the initial wave of like, hey, let's use TensorFlow, and then it was CUDA, and then you can go back to using Tensor. Initially you're going, I have to jump on this, and then all of a sudden I just wasted my investment. To all of a sudden, oh, it's okay, I didn't waste my investment. The problem is with that kind of the over exuberance for new technologies or new approaches. It kind of evens out. If something is good enough, it'll find a way to survive. And the kind of like with choices of tools, or if you're going multi-platform, you can go with your choice. If it's going to survive, if it's good, most people will find a way to kind of make it work with the latest and greatest. You just have to be patient and wait for it. If you can, if you need the latest and greatest immediately, you may have to jump. But I think, knowing your situation, knowing your needs, and being honest about it. And that's going to be tough because everybody wants to, jump on the train and get the maximum value that they can. But you have to know your people. You have to know your organization. Do you move fast enough to take advantage of it? And if not, jumping with something or staying with what you have may end up being the smarter move. It's always bad chasing the latest and greatest. And from a personal standpoint, knowing like the latest gadgets, I have overinvested and visited. I've been buying way too much on Amazon to.
Right. But I think you're pulling together a lot of interesting things, like, well, at least interesting to me, things we brought up, and that is what you were describing there. Like, let's say you're going through the 4 or 5 different, like, I don't know, big data processing things, or nowadays like various AI processing things. It's almost like, on the one hand, kind of as you were joking, right? Like if you are going through 10 different gadgets to like solve a common problem, like boiling an egg or something like that, that might be a little excessive. Although you could also make the business case that, like, what else are you doing with your time? It's fun, right? So you totally maxed out the ROI on this in your personal life. But getting out of the jokey zone there, right? Like the ability to try, several different AI services, for example, you can do that if you have this like future fitness, right? Like if you have agility and you've kind of built up your system to be able to switch to different things. Now, kind of as you were saying, like you might find that you end up in a cul-de-sac with one of these things and you can't sort of like roll your data and your business logic into the next thing. But I think at least having that awareness it does like give an illustration of the value of, so to speak, paying down technical debt so that you have more agility and future fitness, right? Like, and I think it's a nice link between the two, going all the way back to what I was saying earlier, that it's often hard to make the business case that you should pay down technical debt.
Yes. I mean, one of the things that we try to point out, like when you're adopting a new platform or you're modernizing or doing transformation, it takes a lot of resources. It takes time. And one of the things we talk about in our research is like corporate agility, organizational agility. And if you've committed too many resources and it takes up too much of your budget and you're doing this transformation that's going to take 2 years and a competitor comes out with this brand new service that is gaining them customers at your expense, you may be locked in and you're only 6 months in. You can't do anything until you're done. And so being aware of that and being able to understand and plan to say, all right, we're going to be less capable or less agile for the next 2 years. Is that worthwhile? Or in case a competitor develops something, we need to have excess. Do we hire more people? Do we look at it, extending the time frame because this is independent of any innovation that we may have or have to address? Those are all things that we think are important, especially, even though a lot of organizations are traditional, if they're modern or future fit, this can make the difference between, profiting or even surviving. And so that's why we're trying to do this approach and trying to kind of expand in so many different directions.
Yeah. I think you're also alluding to another, I was using the metaphor of a rusty factory earlier, but
Yes.
like kind of as you're going through, like one, there's, as you were saying, you want to have a model, all of the data, access to knowing what's in your portfolio to make that strategic decision. Like, is it worth it to what our business is to delay new features for a year so that 2 years from now we can do something, right? Like you've got to make those trade-offs and know what's out there. And I think the other thing that comes to mind is this notion of almost having like organizational training, right?
Yes.
Going through training. Not that you can only see my head here, but you can see that I'm not an avid fan of being in training. But this notion of like just keeping, as you were saying, your future fitness, right? And that I think might be another notion of saying like what we're doing here when we're adding in more testing for our software or we're upgrading things is like we're making sure that we're training our IT system. I mean, this metaphor is going a little far here, but again, it's like I'm always looking for a new way to like represent this idea of it's good to work on legacy stuff and bring an understanding to it.
Yeah. The other thing, like with the future fit discussion, that adaptive, creative, resilient, that I'd like to bring in right now is the fact that, you're not creative, you're not adaptive, you're not resilient unless you're able to handle failure. And that's the thing in terms all senses, like being able to, hey, system failures, software failures, but also in terms of business objectives, ideas, experimentation in terms of, hey, I want to create a new customer experience. Not everything will pan out. And the idea of it is it's not necessarily a failure, but it may be a lesson. So in this case, like you look at AI, it's been pursued for a long time, decades. And recently with kind of with the technology available now, you're able to do so much more with it than say even 5 years ago, let alone anything before then. You may come up with incredible ideas that today's technology or today's platforms may not enable, but holding on to it and being able to say, I see something in coming down the road. This is where understanding, okay, being able to adopt this new platform, I can move from my legacy systems over to this, have that new experience, have that superior experience, and bring in more customers and more revenue and more profit. And that's part of what future fit is really about. It's being able to kind of break through that mindset of just, being perfect every time, no mistakes, because mistakes are going to happen, issues are going to happen, and being able to kind of clear that. It's really about that lessons learned.
Yeah, you're creating also a good kind of like simple thought exercise, which is, you could, to raise awareness about making sure someone's future fit and they're addressing their legacy and their tech debt. You could ask questions like, well, let's say all the governance and security stuff for AI was taken care of, and all you had to do was like load all your corporate data into this magic AI machine, and then in a couple of days you could start asking it questions, right? And then the question becomes like, could you like do that in a couple of hours? Could you just like get all the data and load it up, right? And like, it's almost like that's a very similar to like a path to production. I mean, I guess it is kind of a path to production question of like, so let's go through like, what would you actually do? Right. And I would suspect, in thinking through that kind of path to production to doing AI stuff, that they'd kind of assume that all they would have to do is just like, I'm being jokey about it, but like,
Yeah.
export a CSV file from Salesforce or something. But like, it's probably actually a really time intensive, very difficult thing to actually gather up all of that data and put it somewhere. And so like, I think, when we do like path to production analysis, which is usually like, like it's a workshop that we do with people, and it's usually more about releasing an application, not about smartening up an AI or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, that kind of exercise tends to expose a lot of tech debt. And also I would call it like, and it's kind of part of that system stuff you're going over, like organizational debt, right? Like, just it very quickly, you only need to spend a couple of hours to just kind of imagine everything that needs to happen. And you very quickly get to like, why are we waiting here to do this? And why does this part not work? And so forth and so on. It's a good way to kind of probe and discover what's there. And so, before we wrap up, there is the last thing I wanted to talk about was, and we've kind of captured it in some of the ideas that you've gone over here, but how how do you advise people to like make this change sustainable, right? Like, that is to say, it's, especially if you're a consultant, it's actually great if people have a project mentality, right? And they just like, we just want you to modernize this thing and be done with that, and then we'll call you in a couple of years. Right? But how do you, like, when you're talking with people, how do you advise that they like make the kind of cultural changes so that they have less urgency and less of a kind of a legacy trap that they're stuck in?
I think thank you for bringing that in. I think the biggest thing is really just you have to start by instrumenting. You need, as you discussed earlier, the biggest thing is just making sure you capture as much of the information as you can, because you can't make decisions, or you can make decisions without information. You can't make good decisions without all that information. So I think part of the thing here is looking at, for if you're a software developer or if you're in IT, having all the systems instrumented from an organizational process standpoint, your ESM or ITSM tools, operational tools, have them instrumented, and being able to have that information collected and understanding, if you have enough understanding of all the processes of how everything is interrelated, you can then start making optimal decisions about software development, about your IT infrastructure, about your technology choices. But it all starts by developing that initial habit of collecting as much as you can, so that you have something at your fingertips to show this is what's happening and here's what's going to change that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, because I don't, well, I don't know if it's an embarrassing admission, but I don't really think about that so much when it comes to tech debt stuff. Maybe I'm more focused on like the software angle, but I think you're exactly right that you need to have your like sensing machine in place, right? And because once let's say you have like a one-time project, so to speak, to fix let's say you've got an older system where, as you were saying, there are 12 people in the world who know how it works, and 8 of them work for you,
Yeah.
right? And there's a Wikipedia page on it. That's fantastic. But like, so you can kind of address that problem in a one-off way, but everything's gonna, if you don't sort of like put this sensing mechanism, this instrumenting, this collecting and monitoring of what you have, this just knowing what you have in place, you're pretty quickly going to get lost again, right? And not really know what's going on there. And um, I think that is an important thing to put in place there. And it also, I think it fits well with the notion. The other thing that you often want when you're doing like, you know, when you encounter and you're addressing tech debt stuff is you want to use the opportunity to kind of like introduce new ways of doing things and new tools, right? Like I always think you have to be a little careful that you don't want to like, you know, no one wants to, what's the old phrase? Like change the jet while the plane is flying. That
Yeah.
seems a little harrowing, but
It is.
but it's good. It's good to make sure that you actually have an eye on being able to monitor things.
Yeah, I think, and to the point you made about, hey, doing this infrequently, you know, the business world and tech world are infamous for the amount of change that's happening. And it doesn't seem like it's slowing down. It seems to be increasing. So, you know, the number of times you're going to need this information at your fingertips to make that decision or make the right decision is going to be increasingly shorter. That means you need the tools, you need these processes. And now that I'm no longer a consultant who's brought in every time, you know, you can save a little bit of money just by having this, and you know, and being able to do it yourself. You know, not that consulting doesn't have a place here or can't provide value, but if you develop that culture and that habit of having all that information collected and being able to look and develop new analysis to understand the impact any technology choice is going to have on your organization, that's going to be great, and that'll help the organization mature as well. So instead of having it be siloed, you're going to see more value when you start combining information from the different organizations with or different teams within an organization. And then once you're able to analyze that and find out the overall impact or the holistic impact, you're able to make better and better decisions. And so I think just starting with that is, and because of the market, it's a critical thing to do.
Yeah. You know, I mean, just one last attempt at a cheesy analogy. Like I've been reading the old classic. What is it? Tinker Tailor Cheesemaker Spy, and like it's anytime you read like some big company spy novel, it seems like there's so many tiny little insignificant things they spend so much time and like effort and everything else on. But I you know, there's an analogy here that like, well, they may not have immediate business value for setting up some source, but eventually they will, right? So it's the same thing of like setting up this instrumentation on the world that you want to monitor and always being ready, if needed, to do something with that information and do something with the actions that you have there, which I think is a good reason for, as we've been doing here, advocating for, let's make sure we have a good type of infrastructure in place that can be instrumented, that has this kind of agility to it, and also that we ongoing can know what's in our portfolio, that things are instrumented well. We can get that kind of centralized view of it, right? And that we always make things are sure that things are plugged into there with it. Well, you know, to wrap up a little bit, I just wanted to go over. I spent so much time delightfully going over what y'all are doing over there in Forrester, which is fun. Like I said, I think the model is really great to look at if people have a chance to look it up. But I just wanted to mention very quickly what we in VMware Tanzu do in this area. And there's three things I think that are great to look into. You can probably guess which one I think is the best based on the pictures for it. But the first one is, you know, we were talking about, I was talking about how cloud native technologies and platforms like give you this new openness, this new ability to have less opaqueness, less difficulty managing things, a standard way of packaging and deploying, even of instrumenting, as we've been talking about, the applications that you have, because they, especially when you're using something like Kubernetes, because you're opening up that infrastructure layer. And what we have, one of the platforms that we have is the Tanzu application platform. And what it does is it essentially finishes out, if you will, Kubernetes. It adds all the stuff on top of it, including how you standardize the way that you're packaging and configuring things. It standardizes the templates that developers use, but it also adds things above and beyond Kubernetes, like the way that you model and you monitor your path to production, the way that you build software and get it into production. And the way that, one of the things we talked about was the way that you have awareness and you're sharing knowledge about how things are working. So for example, in the Tanzu application platform, there's a lot of emphasis on APIs that developers use, not only discovering those APIs, but also by using things like Spring Boot and other things like that, having them very easily start to use and understand APIs, right? And this is one of those areas that I think, if I can borrow the term, gives you some future fitness, gives you some agility, where you're thinking about what is the best way that people can have ongoing usage and discovery of APIs so it's not like hidden. They're not those 8 people, right? Like we're more trying to encourage ongoing knowledge of it. So definitely, if you are looking to build out a cloud native thing, support multiple types of clouds, as we were also talking about, it's worth looking into the Tanzu application platform if you're kind of building out your multi-cloud Kubernetes way of doing things. Now, another thing that we do in the Tanzu Labs group, the consulting group that we have, who very much follows the positive side of what we were saying, the more coaches rather than people who do work for you, right? Like you don't want the coach to win the race for you. You want them to help you win the race on your own. I'm not a sports person, so I always shock myself when I make some sports analogy. But in that practice, what we've developed over a little over 10 years is a way of going in, and you can kind of see a picture of it here, and really analyzing that full end-to-end process, that path to production that you have, and using that to identify parts of your portfolio, applications that would be good to start modernizing. And it's pretty easy. You can look in the attachments that we have if you want to get an overview of what this rapid portfolio modernization, this process that we go over is. It uses a practice we've developed called the SWIFT methodology, which, true to its name, is focused on learning quickly and doing quickly to help you kind of escape this legacy trap. And then finally, also, you can find a free copy of this in the attachments for the webinar here. But I mentioned that I've spent some time recently kind of talking with and studying how people are getting out of this legacy situation. And my co-author, my coworker, Mark, and I there, pictured there, we wrote this up in I think it's like 82 pages. So just long enough to be a sleep aid if you can't go to sleep at night, and also read the full of it. It's called The Legacy Trap. And it really kind of goes over a lot of, kind of a lot of what the setup we've talked about here. But it also goes over a methodology, a model that you can start applying to figure out how to really put a strategy to escape the legacy trap in place. And as Alvin and I were talking about, my other hope with that book and Mark's hope was to try to explain to people who might have gotten you into this legacy trap that they should pay attention to it, right? Like one of the premises of so some of the discussion that we've had here, and definitely of that book, is that if you have a problem with legacy software, it's because your organization hasn't really taken it seriously, right? Like now there may be some trade-offs that you took and things like that, but generally if you're suffering from legacy stuff, it means that you probably need to go up the kind of organizational management stack and figure out how to convince them that it's a bad idea. And you should reprioritize how you're doing things. So anyways, those are 3 things to look in addition to the research that Alvin was going over, which seemed great. So, well, first of all, thanks for being on, Alvin. It was great going over this stuff with you. I had an enjoyable time.
Thank you for having me.
And also, thanks to everyone who took the time to view this, whether live or not. And if there's any follow-up, feel free to send it along to myself or others, and we'll see what we can help you out with. So with that, we'll see everyone next time. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.